They had these classrooms, and there they had optical range finders, and so that was, of course, what got us into it. But it turned out that we also had to learn there to use mechanical computers. They're really the forerunner of today's computers, and they would solve firing problems for guns. I mean, I don't think we really know anything more than how to operate them and get the answer. But they were mechanical computers that would take into consideration the wind and the distance and if the target was moving and so, all sorts of factors that can affect aiming and firing of guns. Now, it was an excellent school, and I can't say enough even about all Navy training. I thought it was excellent. We also quickly found out, though, that the magic word that we first heard there was radar. And to that point, we hadn't even seen anything about it, knew nothing about it. But radar is really known as radio detection and ranging, and that's the short way they called it, radar. And with the radar, well, you could determine how far away a target was electronically, say within 5 yards, even if it was 20 miles away. You would know exactly what you just had to crank into your fire control computer in order to solve the problem of distance. And so we spent a lot of time on that, training on that. They'd have ships going up and down the coast, and they would know how far away they were, and we would have to try and make sure we could solve the problem, come up with the right answer. But it really was great. We were young and eager to learn, and it wasn't really that much beyond us. There wasn't much to do in Fort Lauderdale. We didn't have that much time off. I myself only remember taking a bus one time down to Miami. And Bryce, you may have been with me. I honestly can't remember that. There was a bunch of us. We went down to Miami and looked around. And of course, it was during the war. And one thing I really remember that irritates me is on Miami Beach, there was all of the vacationers. They hadn't taken over Miami Beach, and you'd never know there was a war on if you went there, because even the cars down there had like New York license plates or Illinois. At that time, New York City and Chicago were the main source of tourists to southern Florida. And it was a little bit disconcerting, though, to see these cars down there, because the gasoline was heavily rationed at the time, and that's when I guess you start to grow up a little and realize that money buys a few privileges. And it's a bit of a negative comment, I suppose, but that's the way it was. But anyway, what we did is we even got an opportunity while we were there to go out on our first sea voyage. It was only a day trip. It was on the USS Absecon. Now, the Absecon was a seaplane tender, and what it had on there is a catapult and a seaplane that they would shoot off the catapult and it would fly around, and then it would come down and land, and by means of a hook we would pull it out of the water again. And also the Absecon, and we were on it all day, that was a target ship for the Naval Air Forces down there who were training in torpedo planes. And it was interesting. The way it would work is that we'd go up and down the coast off of Fort Lauderdale and off of Port Everglades. We just went back and forth, maybe over a 20-mile span or so. And these torpedo planes would take off from their Florida bases in training and go out to sea and then come in toward the shore, toward us, as we were going parallel to the shore. And they would drop their dummy torpedoes, and then they had a group of people who were recording the hits on the ship. The torpedoes didn't actually hit the Absecon. What would happen is they set these dummy torpedoes so that they would run a little bit deeper and actually pass under the ship. But, you know, you could tell if it had been set, say, for 5 feet below the surface, it would have hit the side of the ship, and that's what they were practicing. And then, of course, the torpedoes themselves, they had some sort of a device, and they would pop up to the surface after they went under us, and they could be retrieved and used over and over again. So that's, in fact, President George Bush, who was a naval torpedo pilot, I remember once he talked about how he was down there at that time. Who knows? I may have been torpedoed by President Bush in a sort of facetious way. But anyway, it was our first taste of sea. You know, we thought we were pretty good sea dogs by now. We'd been out on that big ocean. I do remember just one other thing about it. Was the fact that here we were in Florida, and this time it was, say, November or December of 1944, and as you went along on the ocean, even off the coast of Florida, it was fairly cool at that time. I guess I expected it to be a little bit warmer and balmier, but it wasn't. And but anyway, it was just an interesting observation. Now, what we did is this is where Bryce and I met at this fire control school, and we were together until our discharge in June of 1946, after we put our ship in mothballs at Astoria, Oregon. Astoria, if you look on your map, you'll see is right at the mouth of the Columbia River, probably 150 miles down river from Portland, Oregon. It's a beautiful river. But anyway, that's where we first met, and from that day forward, we really stayed together. And actually, it was the first time I'd ever met a Mormon. And I was impressed, and so was everybody else from the East, because their language is certainly not salty, and they didn't drink tea, and they didn't drink coffee, they drank milk. Well, at first, I didn't know what to make of it, but then after about a week or so, hey, you realize these guys are for real and stand for something, and that was the end of, I mean, there was never any differences between us, but I think it was interesting for youngsters like myself to meet youngsters from another section of the country. I'm sure Bryce had the same feeling himself about the whole deal. But anyway, one of the names I can remember of people that came with Bryce is Mark Barrett. It's B-A-R-R-E-T-T. And Mark was from Ogden, Utah. Later on, I will show you a picture on the video of Mark. But I wasn't really particularly close to Mark, but he stayed with us, and he was on our ship too. And so anyway, what he did is I ran into Mark in Troy in 1991. I got a phone call, and it was Mark and his wife, of course, whom I didn't know, And so we had a lovely visit. He now lives in Colorado. I'm sorry to say I don't know exactly where, but if for any reason that you wanted to get a hold of him, I mean, that would be a way of doing it. Mark Barrett, and he again was certainly one nice fellow, and so it was just after all those years to have someone come up to you and relive it for a few moments was pretty good. Well, anyway, what happened was in late January of 1945, we finished our training at Fort Lauderdale, and they sent us down to Miami to assemble us in a hotel. We were there for several days. The Everglades Hotel was the name of it. We saw a little bit of Miami then. And then they put us on a troop train that took us up to Little Creek, Virginia. Now, Little Creek, Virginia is right at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and is a suburb of Norfolk, Virginia, where they have the gigantic naval base and still do, you know, building battleships, aircraft carriers, and the whole 9 yards.